I'm excited, man. I haven't seen your smiling face for like a week.
Here we are. Back of my studio is kind of messy. I'm looking back there.
You know,
Yeah, and we're a day late and a half hour late. We want to do these at on Mondays at 12 Eastern time, 11 Central time, but just not getting that accomplished.
well, you know, in our defense, when you're writing songs and building a real estate empire and launching a online music tutorial class and doing social media and everything else, and you're running a business and I'm a father of three. It's not like we're just twiddling our thumbs, bro. And in your defense, you have one of the cleanest studios I've ever seen for an artist. I know
Really?
you think it's messy. I think you do pretty well with all the stuff that's in there. I
Yeah.
like that particular Stratocaster that's in the background leaning up against the couch.
That Telecaster is doesn't get much love. Um, a Strat Plus from they made it from the late '80s to the late '90s. Made it about 10 years, and it was their best Strat, except for Custom Shop. They put a lot of love into that guitar, but they used a lot. They had just been, was it '85? They got back. They went private again from the corporate paymasters. Was it CBS or did CBS have Gibson? I always get CBS had Fender, right?
Yeah, CBS.
Um, Post CBS, was it '85? Do you know that exact year? I think it was '85 that it got bought back from CBS.
I think so.
And so
And they made the pluses. I think 85 to 90.
87. It took them a couple years.
87.
Imagine you buy a company back and what did we just do? What changes can we make? I mean, it takes time to do some research. And I think the earliest plus was 87. And the unique things about the plus is it has a lot of third-party parts, which Fender today would never do. It's got the lace sensors. Don Lace invented those lace sensors. They put those on all the Strat Pluses. Pickups. It's got the nut is by a company that starts with W. Williamson. It's a roller nut, which third party. I think the tuners are Spurzl.
Spurzls are great, man.
Locking tuners. And so a lot of third-party parts. Are there any other third-party parts I can't think of right at the moment? But those, Fender would never do that today, right? Sure. Fender is not going to be putting third-party parts on.
Man, Fender releases so much, so many different models. I don't even know what's going on anymore.
Yeah.
It's like now when you buy a Strat, you almost have to be an expert to even know what you're buying because it's all the way from the relic Strats to the custom shop Strats. It's all the way from 10 grand to 5 grand to 3 grand to the standard Strat, which is $1,000, and then they've got the Mexican Strats. Now they're $500 or $600.
Products, and then you got the Squires.
Right, Squires.
They're not branded as
made Strats.
What's that?
There's still some Japanese. I don't know if they're manufacturing now, but there's some great Japanese Strats out there that you can get on the cheap. Yeah. Interesting story, Tim. When I was probably 19 or 20 years old, I had essentially that same model of Stratocaster. I had a Fender Plus. It was green, and I loved it, man. It was green, and it had lace sensor pickups. And all of the musicians that I would play it around, all the guitar players, guitar players are notorious for you don't have this kind of gear. It doesn't.
Hi, Nikki. You just have somebody on our live. Anyway, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Well, I had that same exact model, and I loved it, and it was green. And every time I would play it out, there was always some snob. There's a lot of guitar players. For people that don't play guitar, there's this thing with guitar players that they kind of will snob you a little bit for your gear.
You can't.
There's an idea that you have to have, a guitar that's worth a couple $1,000s or whatever. So I had that guitar and I loved it, and everybody would kind of snub it and talk bad about it. I love you too, Nikki Cole. Everybody would talk bad about it. And I started thinking, well, maybe it's not a good guitar. And then I saw Warren Haynes play a show with the Allman Brothers, and he played a Strat Plus with Fender lace sensors, same guitar. So then that became my defense. After that, anytime anybody ran down my Strat, I was like, well, it's good enough for Warren Haynes.
Yeah, and I admit that I used to worry about that kind of stuff.
Sure.
You know, my Les Paul, my first real guitar I bought was a Les Paul Deluxe, and the Deluxe, an 81 Deluxe, and the Deluxe, contrary to the name, there's a standard and a custom, and the Deluxe would, you know, Deluxe should be higher quality than a standard, wouldn't you think? But no,
Right.
not Gibson's thought process. A Deluxe actually used mini humbuckers, and the bodies were really cut out for P90s, but they had these Epiphone mini humbuckers laying around, so they slapped them in there for a few years. In fact, the only Les Paul you could buy unless it was custom ordered in the early 80s was a Les Paul Deluxe. If you wanted a standard with full width humbuckers, it had to be a custom order by the music store. Typically would do the custom ordering, and so I always felt inferior about that. I still have that guitar. I love it. But people would say, well, how come, what's wrong with your pickups? How come you got those puny pickups on there?
I know. It's a guitar player snob kind of thing. And that bothers me because I have a lot of students that'll say, well, I can't really play because I don't have the right guitar, and they'll have a great guitar. You know, there's lots of manufacturers that make guitars that really, truly are just as good as Gibsons or Fenders when you boil it all down. It comes back to who played them, you know. I've always felt pretty strongly that, like, if Hendrix would have played a Gretsch guitar, we'd all be playing 6120s or White Falcons, because Hendrix just imposed his will on his instrument. And I know this from having the music store for many years, that the best way that I could sell a guitar was to play it. If somebody was looking at a guitar, I knew that if I got it off the rack and made it sound a certain way, they're going to buy it, man. And the reason why is because we hear something and we go, oh, that's the instrument. Got to have the instrument to sound like that. And that's what happened with the Stratocaster. I mean, Hendrix came out of nowhere with the Strat, and all of a sudden, Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton and all those British guys, they were all going out and getting Stratocasters. Not because they preferred Stratocasters over any other guitar, because they thought the sound was in the guitar. You know, they weren't taking into consideration that Hendrix was playing guitar 18 hours a day. It really doesn't matter.
And Clapton, you know, I'm a huge Clapton fan. He's my number one influence on guitar. And Clapton won't admit, or according to Clapton, he didn't switch to the Strat because of Hendrix. He says it was because of Buddy Guy and Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were some other earlier Strat. I mean, Buddy Holly probably was one of the first. I mean, he started using it when they first started making it, right? Sure. I mean, he has to have been one of the first well-known users.
Well, and what's interesting to me is that Leo designed the Stratocaster to try to make the perfect country guitar, which is fascinating to me, because he had already made the perfect country guitar. He had the Telecaster, but he just couldn't be happy with it, and made the Strat. But I will say, out of the many inventions of man, you'd be hard pressed to look at any other two inventions and say, this guy got it right the first time. And especially the Telecaster, because it was the first solid body guitar, and really it hasn't changed much. I mean, simplicity in design. A Tele's still a Tele, and a
Well, I mean,
Strat is still a Strat.
yeah, yeah. You know, and I know it's a musical instrument, and I suppose you could say the same thing for other musical instruments like pianos, Baldwin pianos. They probably make those the same way they did before. But how many other things in general are still extremely popular from the original design that was developed 70 years ago?
Exactly. Exactly right. I mean, that is the genius of Leo Fender. I mean, cars, they're implementing changes on automobiles daily. They're implementing changes on construction all the time. A Telecaster is still pretty much how it was when he came out with it in 1952. It's essentially the same thing. We have yet to improve on the design. And a friend of mine had a great comment about the Stratocaster. He said that the best part about a Stratocaster is that it's like a blank palette to paint on. You can change a Strat. You know, there's lots of moving parts. You can change out the pickups and change out the pots and change out the toggle switch and set it up however you want. So my friend said the Stratocaster is like the United States Constitution, which I think is brilliant, man.
Don't get political
Well,
here.
no, it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it is. I mean, almost everything that wasn't designed by Gibson, every other guitar is modeled after a Strat. There's no argument that it's the most popular design, and it's brilliant. Everything about it. I mean, the contour, the body contour, where the volume knob is, you can get to the volume knob with your pinky. Where the pickup selector is, you can get it with your pinky. Stratocasters to me are just, they're fascinating. I mean, even when I'm not playing them, I look at them sometimes and it's like, how, you know, did this guy just slam dunk it right out of the gate? It's such a brilliant design. And not just like, it's never gotten, the instrument itself has never gotten compartmentalized like so many other instruments have. Like when you think of the Telecaster, you say, oh, that's the country guitar. You think of Les Paul, it's like, oh, that's a rock guitar. You think of a Gretsch, oh, that's Western swing or rockabilly. You think of Ibanez, you think of jazz. You think of a Stratocaster, it's never ending. You know, it's touched every genre. It's such a versatile instrument.
Absolutely.
It's all over the place, man. There's nothing better. There's nothing better than a Strat. I think that you'd be hard pressed to find an invention that somebody just absolutely knocked out of the park more than Leo Fender did with those two guitars. It's just brilliant. Brilliant. And Leo Fender was a genius.
And he wasn't a guitar player, and he really wasn't. Electronics was his thing, right? He had if my understanding is correct, he started out as a radio repair guy, and he understood the circuits and how he got into working with wood and all of that stuff he had to learn. I mean,
sure. Well, I think that's what made him such a brilliant inventor, is because he was well known for the way that he would reach out to players. He wanted data. How can I improve this? How can I make this design better? In fact, I mean, that's what happened with the Stratocaster. Is he was reaching out to guitar players and saying, if you could change anything about this guitar, what would you change? And taking that information in. There was a famous country guitar player, and I can't remember his name. You may post it on the video later. But there was a famous country guitar player. They said he was like the guy with the magic fingers or something to that extent. And Leo went to him with the Telecaster and said, if you could improve this, what would you do? And this guy gave him the idea to put the volume knob where it was, to put the contour in the body. So Leo was constantly going to his bass and saying, how can I make it better? How can I make it better? How can I improve? Which is brilliant because he was doing it as a collective, you know? He wasn't just an inventor inventing things. He was tapping into the source and using the collective. It's just fascinating. I know I kind of get rambling about the Strat, but it's literally my favorite thing in the whole world when I look at him and
Well,
play him. And
you know, uh, he he had so many innovations. I mean, Gibson, you know, the often Gibson Fender are discussed in one breath as two iconic American brands.
sure,
And Gibson really is guitars, really not amps. They did have Gibson amps. I have a Gibson Maestro that is one of my favorite little tiny
that amp is
amps.
amazing.
Yeah, it's from the early '60s. But Gibson definitely was not known for amps, but
Nothing like
Fender
Fender, man.
amps and guitars. I mean,
Well,
and even after he sold the company because he wanted to retire, and then he got bored, and he started two more companies actually. Music Man, or took over Music Man. I believe it was failing, and they begged for him to come in and help. And he did an invention with bass. He was the first person, if I understand it correctly, to put out a commercially successful active bass, which
yes,
there's a lot of players that bass players that they all you know, it's either active or passive. There, of course, you got your P bass guys and jazz bass guys, but you got guys who love that active bass. He invented it.
absolutely.
I mean, or was the first person to commercially successfully do it, right?
Yes, sir. And you know what? The guys that don't play the Music Man Stingray basses, the guys that don't play those, what do they play? They play a Fender P bass, or they play,
Yeah.
or they play a Fender jazz bass that Leo invented. So, for the most part, you have guys that play Stratocasters or Telecasters. They plug into an amplifier. Well, what kind of amplifier do you use? Use a Fender Twin or a Fender Princeton or a Fender Champ or a Fender Bassman, which the Marshalls were all modeled after.
The
So
bass drum.
the argument could be made that Leo not only invented the first solid body guitar, he invented the Strat, he invented the most popular bass in history, he invented the great Fender amplifiers. He had a big hand in that. But the argument could be made that they invented the Marshall because those early JTM 45s were essentially basements with British tubes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what did he not? What did he not invent? I mean, the only stuff left is the Ted McCarty era, Les Paul era Gibson guitars that came out. You know, the Les Paul, the Flying V, the SG, the Explorer, Firebird, Thunderbird. All those are great guitars, but there's no argument that they're not as versatile as the products that Leo was making. Leo, in my mind, was light years beyond what anybody else was doing. And it's funny, man. It's like most of the shows that I do, even if I bring a Gibson guitar, if I'm not plugged into a Fender amp, I'm plugged into a Marshall JTM 45, which was modeled after a Fender amp. I mean, I don't know that anybody, you know, even Hendrix, for all of his influence and all his might and all his brute musical strength, I don't think anybody did more for music than Leo Fender. It's like he gave us the keys to the car.
Talking about Hendrix, based on articles that I've read, Hendrix never met Leo. Leo never met Hendrix. That they never were in the same room or never met each other, which is amazing. I mean, you know, Jimmy flamed out quickly. He died in the early '70s. Only had like 5 years at the peak, right? Roughly.
Mm-hmm.
67 maybe to 72. When did he die? 71, 72?
71. You know, I read something fascinating about Hendrix, that he said that, you know, he did all the gigs on the Chitlin circuit early in life. But I read a quote from him that he said where he really learned how to play the guitar was in Nashville, because he was stationed in Fort Mitchell in Kentucky in the Army. And he said on the weekends he would go down to Nashville, and he was hearing cats like Lenny Bro and Chet Atkins and all these great Nashville players. He said that's where he really learned how to play, which is fascinating to me, because everybody has this mindset that Hendrix just came out of nowhere. Well, that wasn't the case. You know, he was heavily influenced by those.
Well, how about there's been a lesser known, an earlier, I mean, if we're going to jump How about Robert Johnson? I mean, Robert Johnson
man.
is a mystery to a lot of people. Maybe there's the rumors that he sold his soul to the devil. You know, his listen, we don't have much of his music. I think there's only 28 recordings of his stuff. But and I saw a documentary where they try to figure out where he learned that. How did he? I mean, if you don't subscribe to the devil and just injects you with talent,
Right.
if you believe that he actually had to study like everybody else, who taught him? How did he learn it? What was his influences? And there was a documentary that I read or that I watched that talked about some of the people that probably influenced him and taught him some of the things that he used and had mastered, and many different picking styles. I mean, if you listen to those 28 recordings that we have of his, he's really changing it up a lot.
Big time.
Many different approaches in that small double album, if you will.
Yes.
So,
well, the nails. Robert Johnson was one of the first cats that grew his nails out and would have them shellacked. So he used a heavy banjo pick, and then he grew out the nails on these two fingers and had them shellacked. So he had 3 picks instead of 1. And here's a great Robert Johnson story. When I was first getting into playing the blues really, really heavy, and he still does blow me away. I'm not trying to take away from what he did or the impact that he had. But I remember when I was first getting into fingerstyle guitar and playing slide, the coup de grace to me, the ultimate, was to learn Preachin' Blues from Robert Johnson. It's been titled many things. There's one recording that's called Preachin' Blues. There's another one that they call it Up Jump the Devil. Well, there's a rhythmic thing that happens between the fingers and the thumb pick in that song that's literally impossible. I worked on it for years on end and couldn't get it, and was still banging around on it. And I was probably 6 or 7 years into working on that song, on that style of playing, and found out that they had sped up the recording. Robert Johnson never played that. And guess what? A human being can't play that. Because I would ask every guitar player that I knew, I'm like, hey, can you play this? And they kind of play it. So I'm like, no, can you play it as fast as he plays it? And then can you sing it? Nobody can do that. It's impossible. I'm absolutely convinced. So a lot of that stuff was sped up. And I think that's part of the creepy element to those recordings, is because it was sped up. It does something to the timbre of his voice. It does something to the tone of his guitar. Not taking away from what he did, because it's incredible. I mean, his playing those turds. Yeah, he sped it up, Nicky. He cheated. He sped it up. And I banged my head against the wall for like 8 years trying to figure it out.
Could you imagine what it'd be like if we had concert footage of Robert Johnson? I mean, oh my gosh.
It's incredible. And it's well documented. It was only 2 takes. All the songs that there's 2 recordings of, there's only 2 takes. Unbelievable. I mean, the level that he was playing at, unreal. I don't think that's something that's attainable now, because you have to do that out of necessity. And the fascinating thing about Robert Johnson is, when he was performing live, he wasn't playing those songs. He was playing Tin Pan Alley songs. He was playing stuff that the white audiences wanted to hear. Now, the blues stuff is what he wanted to play, but that's not what he was doing on a regular basis. So it goes to show, as a musician, stay uncomfortable. Do as many different things as you possibly can.
Talking about jumping all over, talking about musicians, I was on my Apple Music app and looking down for they give you suggestions, and there was David Bowie Essentials, and I thought, I haven't clicked on that before. Let me try that. And the playlist has got like 50 to 60 songs unbelievably. He had a long career. And, you know, going through it, and I know most of the songs, you know, most, you know, that they all, I mean, because he had, first he had the glam rock period, and then, you know, in the early 80s when Stevie came on and played on Let's Dance, that was really, his career was kind of, he needed Stevie as much as Stevie needed him to break out.
Sure.
He kind of faded. He was no longer in the conversation. And then he came out with Let's Dance, which was the MTV era, and which is horrible. At the time that they did the video, Stevie was no longer, they had left and gone home. He said, "This is BS, I'm going home." And so when they did the video, you always stand on top of a hill holding a guitar with gloves and pretending like he's playing Stevie's licks. That's offensive to me. I mean, that he did. Anyway, you know, he wasn't, like you said, he was fearless. He wasn't afraid to jump around. And I've been told by that advise, you know, on artist development, saying you need to pick a genre. You need to pick a narrow place to be in. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be free and write and do whatever I want to do. And there's Exhibit A right there. I mean, you can't put David Bowie in a box.
You cannot.
He's all over the map. And the song that I sent you a link, and both of us marveled at it, was from the late 90s. Kind of and I believe that Trent Reznor had something to do with it. At least Trent Reznor did a remix of it, and I think he was involved with the production. It's like a Nine Inch Nails type of song. It's Afraid of America.
It almost sounds like Marilyn Manson heavy, and it's Bowie.
It's so heavy. I know you can still hear his voice on it, and you can say, yeah, that's Bowie. I mean, it's still Bowie, but it is so far removed from much of the other stuff that he is famous for. And I love it. I kept playing that song over and over again.
I'm Afraid of Americans.
Yeah.
Is that the title of the track? I'm Afraid of Americans.
And it's about globalization of, he said where he got the idea, he was in some island like Tahiti or somewhere, you know, idyllic island. And there was like a Kentucky Fried Chicken going up. And he goes, "For F's sake," you know.
Well, recant what you told me about being in Italy.
Yeah, Italy is probably one of my favorite countries, and I have been to Italy a number of times. And in the mid 90s, I went with a friend and spent a month there backpacking back when backpacking was a thing. And that was before we were all about I had a friend who wasn't bored with museums, loved museums like I did. And so this was before everything could be put on digital. And so we had all these reference books. We probably had 25 pounds of reference books that we carried all around Italy about all the different, what all the art meant. And we'd open up these books. Okay, we're in this city. We have to go see this because this is this little known. And we weren't just the tourist thing. We were deep into probably the stuff that was not famous because we were super serious about experiencing Italy. But we spent a week in Florence, and Florence is probably, you know, it's got the museum, and you know, Michelangelo was there, and that was the Renaissance. That was the center of the Renaissance. And there's the Ponte Vecchio, which is the famous bridge, which is, I think, comes from the 1300. And this was before globalization of so many American fast food brands. And in the late 90s, I remember reading an article that the last time I was there was 95. I remember reading an article that said that a Starbucks had been put up and you could see the Starbucks sign from the Ponte Vecchio bridge. I literally cried because it's just, why, you know, for F's sake, I'm with David Bowie. Why are you doing this?
Right.
I mean,
such a timeless. Seeing
you know,
the timeless culture kind of become homogenized like that.
You know, and I love America. I mean, I'm as patriotic as any American, but
isn't it kind of like being in an abusive relationship though?
That doesn't mean that I don't appreciate other cultures, and I want to erase that culture with, you know, I mean, Italy. I mean, Starbucks was influenced by Howard Schultz going to Italy and seeing these wonderful places where people would go and hang out and drink coffee. And he said, I want to take this idea and bring it to America. So it's like really real life imitating art, art imitating real life, and back to real life imitating art. I mean, to have that come back and take over and put out, probably force out the local coffee shops, which were the type of that influenced them to begin with, because you got global brand coming in, this globalization. I mean, all these individual shops were owned by individuals, and each one had its own personality, sort of thing. And you got this corporate idea. Not, I love Starbucks. I go to Starbucks. I'm not criticizing Starbucks, but not in ancient city that's been around, that has much, you know. I mean, the height of the Renaissance was in the 17th century, 16th century. Sorry, my bad. Early 1500s, 1490s to 1520s, in that range. So we're talking, you know, 500 years ago. We haven't even been a country for that long, and Italy has been you know, great culture since long before that. I mean, Rome, you know, was a Roman Empire before the birth of Christ, and so on. Right. So that's some ancient history going on there, and we're going to come in and drop in our corporate shiny establishment and say, "Yeah, you're going to be going to Starbucks now."
We're going to westernize it.
And so it's happening all across the world. I mean, the small little communities that have their own unique personality are being globalized and westernized. No matter where you go, you'll find that happening. And even whether it's homogenized, we're losing something with that. Just we are.
Well, will you do me a favor and tell the story of Ray Kroc? I love that story.
Oh, Ray Kroc, yeah. And there's a great author called what's his song, Grinding It Out. So Ray Kroc was in his early 50s, in the 1950s, and he was a milkshake paper cup salesman. And then he also got involved with selling the spindle, the machines, the mixer machines. And the biggest machine he had was either a 6 spindle or an 8 spindle. I don't recall which, that you could do is that many at one time, you know, milkshakes. And he's a contract sales guy. So he didn't own the company, but he did the contract sales, his company. And back then, I mean, life expectancy wasn't that long. I mean, somebody in their 50s was thinking about, you know, retirement and the end of their life. You didn't try to do something new. I mean, the life expectancy was shorter than it was today. And he got an order for 48 spindles. That's why I don't remember if it was 6 8 spindles or 8 6 spindles, but it was 48 spindles. So 6 8 spindle machines or 8 6 spindle machines from this company in San Bernardino, California. And he was like, what is going on? Who in that one store can use 48 spindles? How can you possibly sell that many milkshakes? So he takes a trip out there. I don't know if he flew or drove. He was living in Chicago at the time. And he gets out there, and it's out in the desert. And San Bernardino was like, LA hadn't sprawled that far. It was McDonald Brothers. And they had this kind of a steep roof kind of deal. You couldn't eat inside because you didn't need to, because they had picnic benches, and they had it very proceduralized, where everything went like that, and they could do it so efficiently. And they were using those 48 spindles. They were selling a lot of milkshakes. And he's saying, wow, whiz bang, this is amazing. And he talks to the McDonald Brothers, and he says, well, you guys need a franchise. And he's thinking, think of how many milkshake spindle machines I can sell if they start franchising these. Every store is going to need these, and I'm going to sell more of these machines, and I'm going to sell more of the paper cups. You know, Ray Kroc invented back, if you ever been to the old style shake machines, there's two ways they do it. Either they have a stainless steel sleeve that fits on top of the cup, or else they have a full stainless steel deal that they mix it in and then pour it out of that stainless steel into the cup. You know what I'm talking about, Jimmy?
I did.
Okay. Well, the problem with the stainless steel one, you have to clean that, or you have to order a whole bunch of them. You have to clean it, and the sleeve is a lot less to clean and less expensive. He invented the sleeve that goes on top, and then you basically mix the milkshake in the cup, and then just pull the sleeve off, and it makes it a lot more efficient. So Ray Kroc was innovative, even in the field that he was working in. So he's out there talking to the McDonald brothers. You need a franchise. The McDonald brothers were nearing retirement. And he says, we're not interested in that. And he says, well, how about I'll franchise it. Give me a contract. I'll franchise it. And so he's only there for one day. He didn't spend overnight. So he walks in there and he leaves with a typewritten contract where he's got the franchise. And the franchise said that he couldn't change any part of the store. So he goes back to Chicago and he contracts to build the first one. And the contractor goes, where do you want us to put the furnace? There's no place in the plans to put the furnace. We don't need a furnace in San Bernardino.
Right.
Because it's the desert. And there are other issues like all the potatoes. Back then, now we got prefabricated potatoes. Back then, they actually had somebody peeling potatoes and cut actual potatoes, and they had a cellar. Part of the reason their French fries tasted so good is because they kept the potatoes in a cellar, and they kind of aged them there, and then they would peel them and make them into French fries, and then everything got, factorized, and now there's it's all reformulated French fry, square, rectangular thinking now. It's not made from real potatoes. But his wife literally said, what are you doing? I mean, you should be retiring. You're spending all this money and waste and endangering our livelihood, our retirement. And his wife left him. And he actually was struggling. This is in the early 50s, still in the mid 60s. It wasn't until he's got all these franchises and he owned the real estate underneath the stores. That was how he did it. He said, I'll own the real estate and you put the store on it when he franchised them. And in the mid 60s, finally, he got a big payday when they went public. And that's when but he struggled for over 10 years. And then there was his number one franchise guy who had multiple stores in South Dakota, Rapid City, South Dakota, had an attractive wife. And Ray's wife had divorced him. So Ray goes, I kind of like her. I'm going to have her as my wife. And sure enough, he stole the wife of his biggest franchisor and made her his wife. And she stayed his wife until he died. And then she was in charge of the estate. And she was in the news too because there were some things that they did. I don't remember. I can't remember her name, but she lived until, I think she died like 10 years ago or so. She was younger than he was. So, it's an interesting story. And the McDonald brothers actually tried to put him out of business. They put another store up. He bought that store they put another store up, and he put a store up right across the kitty corner from them and put them out of business. I mean, he was ruthless. Mm-hmm. He was, when he had to be, he made it work. And unfortunately, McDonald's has, sir?
I read somewhere that McDonald's is one of the McDonald's franchise is one of the top 3 landowners in the United States. Excuse me, because that's
because really that's where they own the real estate for which the stores are under. That he started that, and by accident or by design, I don't know which, it really became.
So how aggressive was this guy?
Yeah, I mean, he was in his early 50s, and which was probably like, early 60s now or mid 60s now. I mean, where most people that are in corporate are thinking about how am I going to retire? I'm going to collect Social Security. And he was thinking aggressive, and he continued on. I think he died into his late 80s and still, stayed quite active with the company and with womanizing. stealing his best
Yeah,
franchise.
right. And now the biggest restaurant. I mean, I love that story because by chance he runs into these people. He signs a makeshift contract the day of
Makeshift,
meeting them.
yeah. One-page franchise contract typed the day he was there. No lawyers looked at that. It was just somebody typed it up while he had to get back.
And it's the biggest restaurant chain in the world. It has changed the world. I mean, it's westernized parts of the country that had no exposure to Western culture before McDonald's. It's been groundbreaking, and all because this guy just, it's like the who's the Virgin Records guy? Who's the guy that owns Virgin Records?
Richard Branson.
Richard Branson. Richard Branson's mantra is, and I love this, especially in business, his mantra is ready, fire, aim. That's exactly what Ray Kroc did. And because he did it that way, and because he was so persistent and aggressive about it, it's the biggest chain on the planet, right behind Amazon now. I mean, nothing's bigger than McDonald's.
For better or worse, I mean, they've got a bad rap for being unhealthy, and the supersize me thing, where the guy ate supersize for a month and put on all that weight, and they did away with the supersize. You want to supersize that? Remember they used to ask you that. They've had some rough go. Is there stuff unhealthy as our diets changed? Everything got bigger.
It's funny to me because I don't know a single person that thinks McDonald's is good food. We all know it's garbage, but it's incredibly consistent. And I think as human beings, we're like, I know what I'm getting here. I'm okay with it. It's unbelievably consistent. Everything at McDonald's is the same. It's fast. It's efficient. So it's really like, I don't think anybody ever says, I'm going to feel good after I eat some McDonald's. I think people just got to eat something that tastes okay, and I know exactly what I'm getting. It's their level of efficiency. They're incredibly efficient, and it's funny because like you go to other fast food restaurants and you wait in line. You go to McDonald's, they're like holding your bag out, waiting for you to drive up. They're like, "Come on, you're cutting into my time." They're unbelievably efficient.
And just compare. I mean, I read a book called Viral Branding, and we've talked a bit about that. And viral branding, see if I can remember the 7 for a viral brand. McDonald's is an example of a viral brand. And let's just compare to, say, Burger King. Burger King has a history of Burger King is about the same age as McDonald's as far as a company, but they're not iconic like McDonald's is. So an iconic brand has an origin story. We just talked about the origin story. That's one. They have a creed. What would McDonald's would be? I guess you know what you're getting, right? I mean, it's consistency. I don't know that they say that as their words. See if I can remember. I'm going to have a hard time remembering all 7. See, so you got rituals. You've got rituals that you go through. You go through the drive-through, or you're waiting in line.
I'm loving it.
That was one of their big ones.
Loving it.
You've got sacred words that you have to learn. It used to be supersize me or fries with that. What would be some of the secret words? Like when you go to Starbucks, an example, nobody knew what a grande or a venti was. Venti just means 20 in Italian, and grande just means large. So it torqued me that people were using an Italian word because I love Italy, and I would for the longest time go to Starbucks and say, I have a 20, and the looks of misunderstanding on the faces of the baristas behind the counter. We don't have that. Yes, you do.
Yeah,
you
absolutely do. You need to know what this means.
It's the Italian word for 20 because it's 20 ounces. So they try to make it exotic, right?
Sure.
So You always
and that's
got
why we pay $5 a cup for Starbucks, man. It's not like the coffee's better
well,
than it is at the
Starbucks
gas
and
station across
McDonald's
the
are
street.
a couple of very viral brands, and they've got those 7 things. In the book that I read, example of a Seattle's best coffee would be a comparison, like Burger King would be a comparison to McDonald's. They both have very similar stores, very similar offerings, but one of those two, there's 2 of them, Starbucks and McDonald's, that are viral and that are, you know, primal. That's the word, not primal, not viral.
Primal branding.
Using the wrong term. Primal branding, where it gets into your soul. And primal branding is the name of the book, and there's 7 aspects of a primal brand. You've got an origin story, you've got a creed, you've got rituals, you've got sacred words, you've got pagans, which are the disbelievers, you've got the leader, and there's one more that I don't recall at the moment. But I'll put them in the comments. And to create a primal brand, Richard Branson, everything he does is primal branding, whether by design or by accident. It's something where people end up Apple computers. People, when a new Apple computer, I mean, iPhones, a lot of their aspects of iPhones are behind Samsung, but people wait in line for a new Apple product. Apple is very much a primal brand. People know the origin story of Steve Jobs. A lot of people, some people, I mean, when he was alive, he was thought of as some very mystical, to have reverence for. Remember the commercials of when they had the guy, the Microsoft, the guy that kind of looked like a chubby Bill Gates, and then the young kid that was the Apple guy. Remember those commercials? They were hilarious. And the Microsoft Windows one would always freeze up, and the guy would get all irritated. And and the cool young guy that represented the Apple brand would just kind of laugh at him or make fun of him.
Well, that branding, the branding is everything, because it's interesting. Even saying the word, when you say Apple computers, I see the apple. You know, those visuals. They're things that we're not even always 100% aware of.
That's one. Icons.
Icon. That's it. That's the 7th thing.
So it's origin story, creed, icons, rituals, pagans, sacred words, and a leader.
Yeah, the pagan thing is interesting, because people almost have to have an enemy in order for them to kind of.
And my best example, I was reading this book, I was thinking about the best example of primal branding regarding the pagans is Trump supporters. I mean, without being in any side or other, I mean, if you just get on Fox News and see how the vitriol directed towards those that are not Trump supporting Republicans. I mean, they're hate America, they're Marxists. I mean, they are the worst of pagans. And so there's no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump has a primal brand, whether he decided it or not. I mean, he's a leader. He's got his origin story his origin story, whether you accept it, how truthful it is that he's a billionaire, self-made billionaire, real estate. His creed would be "Make America Great Again," right? Icon would be
MAGA, the hats.
The hat. Rituals, I guess, going to the meetings that he has, the rallies. Pagans are obviously the Dems, Democrats, libtards. I mean, when you got people going to his rallies saying, wearing T-shirts that I'd rather be Russian than a Democrat, I mean, you have really touched something deep. That primal branding. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying that is primal branding at its best. And sacred word.
It absolutely is. I mean, it's become So much I could say. All I'll say about it is they certainly have a business model.
Yeah, I
That's
mean
all that I can say
that is
without offending.
strongest. I mean, the strongest. There is based on that I've, and again, I'm trying to be neutral and not make a judgment either way.
Right.
There is nothing that can be said for the true zealots that support President Trump. There's nothing that will dissuade them. There's nothing that he could do. I mean, he said it. He literally said that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters because those he understood.
And he's right.
Yeah,
he's right.
He could do anything.
It's in a place now where he could throw a baby in the river on live TV and people would say, must have been a bad baby. I think we should wrap this up before we go on down this road.
Yeah, and
I know your true feelings and I know my true feelings.
I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, so I'm not saying that I'm not saying the other side has it figured out and it's got everything right.
Yeah.
I'm just observing that there is no negativity or even any shade of criticism or evaluation of could have done better by, everybody wants, I'd love to have that rabbit of a fan base for my music career. That would be amazing if I could have people.
It would be nice to be infallible, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I'm on TV and I screw up like Selena Gomez was on. What's that?
Why couldn't we make David Bowie infallible? The world would be a better place today if society as a whole just would have said, you know what? Bowie can do no wrong. In my mind, he couldn't. I just wish everybody else would copy.
Music fans do not have, well, I suppose Justin Bieber's, the Beliebers, when he had a pretty primal fan base, I would say. But you remember when Selena Gomez sang at, was it MTV or Grammys or somewhere, and she was a little bit off key? She said she didn't have she couldn't hear herself. She was crucified on Twitter. Now maybe her fans supported her, but if you have a truly primal fan base, they will not tolerate any negativity directed toward you. And there are probably some artists. I think Bieber had it early on. Remember when he didn't win the Best New Artist Grammy? And it was Esperanza Spalding won it. And his fans were just livid with anger. He's definitely had some. Now the current Bieber is a different. He's a grown-up version of the Teen Idol guy. So does he still have primal branding going on? When you're Teen Idol, young. Usually it's young girls that are passionate about you, and he's onto a different model now, probably. But I think he probably still has. Who would you think has some of the most rabid primal fans in music? Who would you come up? Who could you say maybe?
Slayer.
Oh,
Slayer.
Okay. Metallica. Slayer. Metallica. Don't you think?
Metallica, but not on the level of Slayer. Those guys, Slayer fans are like, they're all about it. They're rabid. So I don't know anything that compares to that on that level.
So what origin Slayer? What is Slayer? You think if you do the analysis on the primal branding, what are some of the things that fit with a Slayer? What are the pagans? What are the Slayer pagans? Those who like Metallica, maybe?
Everybody that doesn't love Slayer.
What are some of the icons or the creed for Slayer?
Well, the logo. They have the bird thing for the logo. They use pentagrams all the time. It's just really dark branding that appeals to a lot of people. It taps into that. I think they leap over the primal branding thing and just touch into the primal aspect of human beings in some way. I don't know that there's a mantra. They certainly have an icon. The pagans are everybody but Slayer fans. And I don't even think they designed it. I don't think they thought it out.
I think a lot of primal branding is by accident, actually.
Yeah, I think it just happened with those guys, man. And I think that's some of the most effective primal branding. I don't think that happened with Trump. I think with Trump, it was designed. They knew what they were doing. They still know what they're doing. It's a business model. They designed it as a business model. It's designed to poke people in a certain place. It's designed to push in a certain way. It's designed to tap into what people are afraid of. It's designed to make people feel attacked on a certain level. I think that was intentional. Slayer just happened.
I honestly do too, because he said early on that he could shoot someone at Fifth Avenue. I mean, that was someone who was very much aware of the kind of following that he had.
Bro, and he said all kinds of dumb shit.
Now, I mean, on a contrast, Biden, who is the presumptive opponent to Trump in the 2020 election, does not have primal branding. I would say no. Definitely not. Would you say? I mean, there's the support he's getting is not to the passionate level that President Trump has.
Right. There's not really Biden zealots.
I mean, he doesn't have a creed. He doesn't have icons. He doesn't have apps that people are wearing. He doesn't have, but Bernie is closer to a primal branding sort of thing. The people that love Bernie love him. Loved him. He's no longer.
I just want the whole thing to get over with, man. I want December to get here. Seriously, because I mean, it's seeing people that I know for a fact love each other be pitted against each other in some alternate reality, which is social media, is mind-numbing to me. I see some of these arguments and I see bridges get burnt and friendships get lost, and it's like, I know in real life these people have known each other their whole lives and they care about each other, but they have some disagreement and it spins out on social media. And social media in and of itself is mind-numbing to me, because nobody would ever interject themselves into a conversation. If you and I were standing on the side of the street having a conversation, nobody would ever come in and be like, yeah, I disagree, without saying hello or anything. There's all these social barriers that just get leaped over. And social media is one step worse than that, because it's not even the conversation on the street. It's as if we're sending each other letters, and other letters are or there's wires getting crossed and things are intercepting in different ways. It's so strange to me to see these real life relationships get burnt. That virtual world, to me, it's mind numbing. It really is. I've had discussions with people that I've fallen out. Oh, they're here to move my refrigerator. Tim, I gotta go.
Well, we have to call it. I think we've been on long enough.
About an hour. Getting a nice new refrigerator today with an ice maker and a water thing. So I'm excited. I'll call you in a few. Love you.
All right. Jimi D and the Wolf.
Emma, refrigerator guy.
See you next time.
Peace.